So you made it. This is your last argument analysis for this semester, and it is on the possible counterarguments in the ProCon. So as a reminder, we have been studying and analyzing this ProCon for the whole semester, and we need to determine the counterarguments, if any, in the pro and the con. So what we have to do is we need to identify the counterarguments. And I have a note here, counterarguments are not guaranteed. Some people fail to do so. If there is a counterargument, the easiest thing for you to do is to copy and paste the sentences involved and then to label it as either a concession or rebuttal. What we're going to see is most of the counterarguments on the con side, there are none on the pro side, are partial concessions or partial rebuttals. If there is no counterargument, you're going to list no counterargument given. If we look at Jen's, that semester we have the issue and conclusion that she identified from the last lesson, and neither the pro side, Robert Mueller, or the con side, Sheila Beatty, gave counterarguments. That was a super sweet, short analysis. However, this semester we do have some counterarguments we need to look at. So like I said, a couple lessons back, a couple videos back, that the pro side, Shireen Azimi, she does not offer us any counter arguments. This is a weakness. This means her argument is incomplete. She hasn't considered what those who say the new media cannot replace journalism, what their arguments are. She hasn't addressed them. So we're going to skip right through here, and we're going to come down here to Dean writings. If you recall, when we identified reasons a few videos back, that I had these light highlighted yellow portions, and I said we're going to ignore those for now because those are actually partial counter arguments. So he actually does attempt to provide some counter arguments. As a matter of fact, it makes up the majority of his argument, which is a strength, I have to say. But one thing I want you to be clear on, when you write your final draft, you're going to give your argument first, and then after you've given your argument, you'll give the counter argument. He sort of mixes the counter argument in within his argument, which makes it confusing for the reader. So let's review his counter arguments. Again, these portions that are highlighted in yellow is what you would put in your answers, and you would identify them as whether they're concession or rebuttal. Or if it's not a concession or rebuttal, it might be just a conceded point, which you will not add. So let's look at this first highlighted part. Remember, he is arguing new media cannot replace traditional journalism. So he says here, remember he gave this weird little piece of evidence about data, or statistics rather, that a third of newspapers, traditional journalism, have vanished and have been in decline. And that was kind of a weird piece of evidence to give in support of his argument. Well, he wasn't. What he was doing is he was anticipating what the opposition might say. So someone like Shireen might say, oh yeah, you guys, is her name? Yeah, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting what her first name is. You guys know that a third of your traditional journalism has vanished, at least 2 closings per week. How would he counter that? So he's anticipating their argument against him. So this is what we call a partial concession. It's in the form of a concession. He's anticipating the opposition, pointing out how traditional media is shrinking. And then he offers his concession statement. He says, while such dire metrics indicate traditional news outlets are struggling, in other words, he's giving a concession statement and agreeing with the opposition, and then he offers a redirect. It does not mean new types of outlets are emerging as the savior. So he gives concession statement and redirect. He doesn't do the setup, and he also doesn't do the restatement. That's why it's partial. So this is what you would put in your answer, and you would label it as a partial concession. Now this little doodad here, nonprofit digital first organizations are, meaning new media, are among the new types of outlets getting attention. And then he gives us some evidence about how many of them are, popping up that sort of thing. This is not a counter argument, but I highlighted it in yellow because I wanted to pull it away from a type of reason. It's actually a conceded point. So what he's doing is he is saying to the opposition, you know what, you're right. You are getting a whole lot of new attention, all these new outlets that are forming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what he does do, you'll notice with this evidence, is he says it's really not that big of a deal anyway. So don't put that in your answer. I just wanted to point out he does concede a point, which is a strength. You should always, whenever the opposition makes a good point, always concede to the fact that they're correct. It does a lot to improve your ethos and a lot to improve sort of the bystanders who are listening in to possibly go with your side simply because you appear to be fair. We move on then to this really large counter argument here. It takes up a good portion of his argument. I want to point out to you a concession should always go setup, concession statement, redirect, restatement. He doesn't have the setup and he doesn't have the restatement. He does have the concession statement, he does have the redirect, but he mixes the order up. So remember, what he's doing here is he's giving a partial concession to the opposition. He's agreeing with something. He says down here, many of these nonprofit digital first organizations, meaning the new media, do an excellent job with local journalism. So look at, he's complimenting them. So that's a good thing. And then he redirects and he says, but, because you always have that transition of but or however, the model so far has not proved that it can replace traditional newspapers. And then if we come back up here to this part, today's newspapers look different, and he goes through all the rest of this here. This is part of his redirect. It's more of an explanation of his redirect. So again, he's trying to explain through these sentences here why these new media outlets haven't proven they can replace traditional journalism or traditional newspapers. So it's a partial concession. So what would go in your answer are these two sentences as the beginning of the partial concession, the concession statement redirect, and the rest of this is redirect as well. And then finally we come to another conceded point, not a counter argument. He says, whoops, I'm doing there. He says, clearly, notice the positive word. So it almost looks like it's going to be a concession statement, but it isn't. Many local newspapers have struggled in recent years, meaning traditional media. So he's agreeing with the opposition, facing economic headwinds and negative impact of big tech's use of their content without compensation. So again, he's saying to the opposition, you make a good point. Traditional media is having economic hardship, and they're dealing with the fact that big tech uses their content without compensation. I agree. But again, this isn't a concession because he doesn't redirect. All right, so we're not going to count that, so that would not go in your answers. So we would say overall that Dean gives us a better argument from the standpoint that he has a fuller argument with not just his reasons and evidence, but also a counter argument, where Shireen gives a poorer argument just from the standpoint her argument is incomplete. Okay, I hope that helps. That is your last argument analysis for this semester.